맨디베 동에디 그주 주신 대왕의 연구에 인도자네 아니 군의 유문초하고 윤재니 동에다바도 군조된 바소.
So if this sort of aspiring to achieve happiness and wishing to overcome suffering is our natural state of being, that is our natural kind of quest, then the question arises, how do we go about fulfilling that valid natural aspiration? So here we find in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths an understanding of two sets of cause and results, cause and effects. On the one hand, you have suffering, which is what we all try to avoid. And suffering comes into being from nowhere, but as a result of causes its own causes and conditions. And similarly, you have happiness on the other side. And cessation can be seen as the highest form of happiness. Now here, when we talk about happiness, we should not confine our understanding purely only to the level of feeling states. Certainly, cessation is not a state of feeling, but one could say that the cessation is the highest culmination or highest form of happiness, because it is a true state of freedom from suffering. So, and that true freedom from suffering or happiness, true happiness, again does not come into being from nowhere or without any cause. Of course, here, from the Buddha's understanding, cessation, because it is not in conditioned existence, cannot be said that it was produced by something. But of course, actualization or attainment of that cessation depends on the path. It depends on an individual's effort. It does not come. You cannot attain cessation without making an effort. So one could say that the path that leads to the cessation is the cause that leads to the cessation. So within the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, what we find are two sets of cause and effects, which are all aimed at enabling the individual to fulfill this fundamental aspiration to be happy and to overcome suffering.
나 담바시 구름디 아니 균제 중릉기 구름디 매버체 이 냠랭기 아니 나 냠뇨께당기 난갈 때는 구름디 송인체 동네 군중 고과 람스 담바시.
And then the question could be asked, if, of course, if that's the reason why Four Noble Truths are taught, then one could ask about why there is this specific sequence, why the Four Noble Truths are taught in a particular order, why suffering first and its origin afterwards. So here we should understand that these order has nothing to do with where things come into being in reality, but rather it has more to do with how an individual can go about in practicing the Buddhist path and attaining realizations based on that practice, and that has to do with the order of the Four Noble Truths.
잠바고도 안다 유라면 나로리야 내 시자 내지도니 방자라 대내 도저 맨날 담바 자와 따르스 아니 동해주도 당고바다 디신람 아니 시자 방자 리고샤시 잡어샤시 담바샤세 송니 다 빼나 아주 내기 나에 동해질 뺏고네 아니 도마 내 너기 요디 그냥 시고리스 봐. 내 너기 요디 시베이나 다 신의 내들 민두별로 게임이잖아요. 아니 내디 죽하는 때는 중도가 뒤줄이야 제 준비인 거지.
Maitreya states in his Uttara Tantra, Sublime Continuum, which is a text, he states that he states that one must recognize that one is suffering. So the illness has to be first recognized, and then the causes of illness to be avoided, and the state of sort of cure must be sought, and then the medicine that would lead to that cure is something that one must take or adopt. Similarly, suffering is something that one must recognize, and the origin of the suffering is something that one must abandon. And the cessation of suffering and its origin is something that one must aspire to actualize, and then the paths that would lead to the to that cessation must be realized. So what this points to is that here the analogy that is used to explain the way in which realizations based on the Four Noble Truths could be attained. The analogy used here is the example of a sick person. In order for that sick person to get well, the first step is that the sick person must know that he or she is sick, or he or she is ill. But without that, the desire to become well or cured from that sickness would not arise. And once you have that recognition, that awareness that you are sick, then of course you will try to find out what led to it, what were the conditions that led to it, and what makes you even more sick. Once you have recognized that, then you will also gain a sort of an understanding whether it could be cured or not, and then you will have sort of a wish to be free from that illness. Once you have that wish, then you will apply all the medication. It's not just a mere wish, but also once you have recognized what are the conditions that led to your illness, you will also have a stronger desire to be free from that, because in a sense, you will also have a conviction that you can overcome that illness. Once you have that conviction, then you will also apply all the medications and get treatment and so on. Similarly, unless you know that you are suffering, your desire to be free from suffering would not arise in the first place. So the first step for a practicing Buddhist is to recognize your state of being as a dukkha, as in the nature of suffering. Once you have attained that recognition, then you will, of course, look into the causes and conditions that give rise to that state of suffering.
다전에 자든데 인도 동네에 타르에 따단도 대화지 그게 가서라 따단도 대화 대당 대두지 따 터블럼지 예바 있는 사네 아니 수족이 민두비 동네 삼야디 따 경쟁된 말이에요.
It's very important to understand the context of the Buddhist emphasis on developing this profound recognition of being in the state of suffering or dukkha. Otherwise, there is a danger of misunderstanding the Buddhist spiritual kind of approach, outlook, and thinking that Buddhism demands a lot of morbid thinking. Being sort of pessimistic and thinking only about suffering. The reason why Buddha emphasized so much on developing a profound insight into the nature of suffering is because there is an alternative, there is a way out, there is a possibility of a freedom from that suffering. That's why the recognition or realization of the nature of suffering becomes very important, because the stronger or more deep your insight into the state of suffering is, the stronger the force of your aspiration to gain freedom from that would become. So it is important to understand that this emphasis on the nature of suffering and the Buddhist spiritual path is within the context of a wider perspective, where there is an appreciation that there is a way out, that there is a possibility of a freedom from that suffering. Otherwise, if there is no possibility of a freedom from suffering, if there is no concept of a liberation from suffering, then it is totally pointless to spend so much time reflecting on suffering. It would be just useless.
다 군의 nhiệm vụ 군대다 남자하고 군대 이부터 바 군중다 아니 람댕기 딘 대부 용단디마 컨디션 만드셔 14로 전에 아니 야라준이디 도면 머리고 머리걸 때는 두지는 남신에는 민수 가사리 계제자고 처와신 도스마다 아니 야나주기 송도 야나주니 룩중도 타네 아니 가서게 코 죽도체 코 룽중도 타네 머리번에 맞아 것이부터 마송야다 야나 야 다갈래 양고 룩중도 니수니 것이 된지 아니 계획 된지 중 계획 된지 아니 시베 된지 중 도시야